Welcome to Garden Crossings. I'm Heidi. Today I am going to be talking to you about some of my favorite new perennials for 2023. So if you've been watching our videos at all, you've noticed that we've had a lot of videos showing the perennials arriving, unloading, the inventory that goes into receiving all those plants, as well as stickering the pots, filling the pots, and getting all those beautiful babies planted. So I thought it's time now that I go ahead and just talk to you about some of those new introductions and what some of my favorites are. So we are blessed to be able to be located really close to Walter's Gardens, which is the Proven Winners perennial wholesaler in Zeeland, Michigan. They're about 3 miles down the road from us. So I'm able to go to their trial gardens all the time. Also, here at Garden Crossings, we have our own trial gardens where I'm able to grow these plants usually about a year or so ahead of time and just see what I like about the plants. Some plants I may never talk to you about because I don't like them. So when I'm talking to you about plants, it's plants that I've trialed, tested, and really enjoy growing in my garden. So we're going to kind of start this series off with my personal experience with the plants, what I've noticed and seen in either the trial garden or in my own trial garden. And then I'll go ahead and give you the details as far as the statistics of their zone, their height, where they can be grown, all the things that you may be wondering above and beyond my personal experience. So the first plant we're going to talk about is a Pulmonaria. It's called Pink and Blue. So pink and blue, that probably kind of gives you the first clue, and that's that the flowers are pink and blue in color. Pulmonaria is an early spring blooming perennial. It's got great foliage, so it's got that nice green foliage with the white, silvery white polka dots on it, and then the nice clusters of pink and blue blooms in the spring. So if you're looking to really start your garden off early with some color, Pulmonaria is a good choice of a plant to plant. The things I noticed in the garden is it had an excellent mounding habit, a very compact plant, lots of flower coverage, so it wasn't just a whole bunch of foliage with a few flowers. It was a nice mound of foliage with excellent proportional flower coverage. So let's look at the details of the Pulmonaria Pink and Blue. It's hardy in zones 3 to 9. It gets 16 to 18 inches tall and about 24 inches wide. It likes to be grown in part shade to full shade locations with areas of fertile and moist or fertile to moist soil. It's great for the pollinators. It attracts hummingbirds as well as honeybees, and it's critter resistant. So for those of you looking for plants that are rabbit and deer resistant, this is a great selection. Next, we have the Agastache Meant to Be Royal Raspberry. This plant I've actually been able to see in the trial gardens for probably about the last 2 years. It was out there unnamed, but I knew that, when I see things like that, it's probably something that's going to be introduced soon. So for the last 2 years, I've been watching that plant. It is an amazing perennial. Things I noticed is it blooms nearly all summer long. It's got these beautiful magenta flower spikes on it. It's about 24 or so inches tall. We'll go over the exact heights in a minute, but a nice upward mounding habit. Fragrant, I noticed that. It's a very fragrant plant. Kind of smells like the anise candy if you're familiar with that. And also too, I've noticed there was a lot of hummingbirds on the plants in our garden here. So let's look into the details at the Agastache Meant to Be. So Meant to Be Royal Raspberry is a very long blooming perennial, like I said, with excellent fragrance. It's hardy in zones 5 to 9 and gets about 32 inches tall and 32 inches wide. It does like to be grown in a full sun area and is bee friendly. Butterflies and hummingbirds love it. Another deer resistant option. It's great for cut flowers. It's also a nice dried flower, drought tolerant. And if the color of Royal Raspberry isn't your color scheme, it also comes in kind of a corally orange color, and that one's called Queen Nectarine. So I can foresee this series maybe getting larger as time goes on. Next on the list, and this one has definitely gotten a lot of attraction on the videos I did from last summer, and that is the Heliopsis Bit of Honey. Heliopsis is a great plant if you have a hot, dry area. How Bit of Honey really stood out to me in the trial was, number one, the foliage. It's got beautiful variegated foliage, green and white variegation. The flowers on it were a bright golden yellow color and lots of flowers. So this plant is another long bloomer, and nearly all summer, once we really started to get warm here in Michigan, this plant was just loaded with beautiful yellow blooms. So if you're in the hot areas down in the south, or even if you're in the north and have a hot spot in your garden, Heliopsis is a great choice for those hot, dry spots. So let's look at the details of Heliopsis Bit of Honey. Bit of Honey is, like I said, a long bloomer. It's heat and drought tolerant, and it can be grown in zones 4 through 9. It gets about 28 inches tall and 30 inches wide. It can be grown in full sun to part sun areas, although I do recommend it, the more sun it gets, the better it does. And it's a bee-friendly plant, attracts butterflies. It's a great cut flower or foliage if you want to even use the foliage in your arrangements. And it is a native perennial. Next, we're going to talk hostas, Shadowland Voices in the Wind. So there are so many beautiful hostas in the Shadowland collection, and Voices in the Wind is another one that I think is a great addition. So Voices in the Wind it's a bigger hosta. It gets about 3 foot wide, maybe about 2 foot tall or so. But the foliage on this one really stood out to me. It's got blue-green leaves, but the thing that I think is really neat is they're a little bit narrower, not super narrow, but a little narrower, and really ruffled edges. So it brings a lot of texture into the shade garden. It is a plant, though, that if you have a spot in the garden, you want to make for sure you give it enough room that it can get to its full size potential, because like I said, it's not a small hosta. It is going to get fairly large in size. So let's take a look at the details of the Hosta Shadowland Voices in the Wind. It's hardy in zones 3 to 9, so nearly everyone here in the United States can grow that plant if you have some shade. It gets about 17 inches tall, and then with a flower spike, it probably gets about another 12 or so inches tall once the spike has emerged. About 29 inches wide, so just under 3 foot wide, and likes to be grown in a part shade to full shade area. The next perennial we're going to talk about is Astilbe Dark Side of the Moon, and here's another one that has gotten a lot of attention whenever I videoed it out in the trial gardens last year. So Astilbe Dark Side of the Moon is the first ever dark foliage Astilbe with purple flowers. So it's really unique, that neat dark black foliage with those bright kind of a magenta purple bloom. Really a stunning look to add to a part shade garden. So if you've got all those chartreuse greens and stuff of hostas or whatever it is you're planting in your shade garden, this dark foliage, that nice Astilbe texture is just gorgeous. So things I noticed out in the trial garden, they had it planted in mass. There was about 5 plants or so, kind of in a zigzagged pattern. And the plants, they were a nice full bushy plant, so a lot of that dark foliage. And then once the flowers emerged too, it had a lot of flower spikes. So it wasn't just this beautiful dark foliage with a couple flower spikes. It was a very full flowering plant. So definitely something that I have on my list to plant in our trial garden this year. We sold out of them so fast. We had a few of them last fall for early introduction, and we sold out of them so quickly that I didn't even get my hands on one to plant in our garden. So it is on our list this year to add into our gardens as well. But definitely, if you're looking for a unique part shade to shade option that just adds in a different foliage texture and flower texture, Astilbe Dark Side of the Moon is a great selection. So let's take a look at the details of Astilbe Dark Side of the Moon. So like I said, it's the first ever dark leafed Astilbe with purple flowers. It's hardy in zones 4 through 9, and it gets about 22 inches tall and about 28 inches wide. It is a little bit later blooming than some of the other Astilbes that are in your garden, but that might be nice because it will help extend that Astilbe season. It likes to be planted in full sun to full shade areas, so pretty versatile. I would say for those of you in the south, maybe go more that part shade type of situation. It is pollinator friendly, another deer and rabbit resistant perennial. So those are great boxes to check, especially if rabbits and deer are a problem for you. Likes to be grown typically in like a moderate to moist type of a area, but once it's established, it can handle a little bit of dryness. Just don't let it get overly dry. Fragrant flowers, nothing that I can say like, oh, that is an amazing fragrance, but it does have a scent to it. And it also makes a great cut flower or foliage. Next on the list is the Summerific Lilac Crush Hardy Hibiscus. If you have never seen or been introduced to the Summerific series of hibiscus, this is something you must plant in your garden, in my opinion. So the thing about the Summerific series of hibiscus is they are huge flowers. So typically they say they're about an 8-inch bloom, little variation from variety to variety, but definitely a dinner plate size bloom. This is a mid to late summer bloomer here for us in Michigan. So usually the end of July, beginning of August is when we start seeing the Summerific hibiscus bloom, and they bloom for about 4 weeks or so. Now, if you plant several varieties in your garden, some do start blooming earlier than others, so you might be able to extend that season by just mixing it up by planting several of these in your garden. They do get fairly large though, about 3 foot tall, 3 foot wide, so you do want to have a space that is big enough for these plants. One important thing to point out with a Summerific or with any of the hardy hibiscus is they are very late to emerge in the spring. So if you plant these plants and it's June 1st and you're like, my plant's dead, believe me, that's probably not the case. They're one of the last things to emerge in the garden, but once they do, they just take off and they'll be ready to flower by the end of July, beginning of August. So you do need to be patient when you're looking for them in the spring to watch for their new growth because it is going to take a little while for that to show up. So Lilac Crush is beautiful light lavender blooms, really kind of ruffly looking flowers, a great addition to the Summerific series because really all of the plants at this point are either like shades of reds, pinks, or even kind of pale creamy whites. So to have this lilac-y tinge to the series is pretty cool. So the thing I like about the Summerific series is there's newer genetics here, and these plants were bred to bloom from what I like to call tip to toe. So there's flowers all the way up and down those stems. Some of the older varieties of hardy hibiscus, all the flowers were on the top. When they were done flowering, they were done. So they didn't last as long. But now with this indeterminate breeding and so many more flower buds up and down that stem, these Summerific flowers just last for a very long time throughout the summer. Each individual bloom lasts for about 2 days or so, and it's interesting when you look at the center of the plant, if it's nice and tight, that means it's probably on day 1, and then once that stamen opens up, it probably means it's on day 2, and this will be the last day of the flower. So just a little interesting thing to look for on the hardy hibiscus. All right, so let's take a look at the details of Summerific Lilac Crush. So Lilac Crush is kind of a rare lilac color when it comes to the hardy hibiscus. This particular one's habit is a little bit more upright and columnar than some of the others in the series. It's hardy in zones 4 to 9. It gets about 5 foot tall and about 4 to 5 foot wide, so one of the more bigger ones in the series. Likes to be planted in full sun to part shade locations, and it's deer resistant, although I'm going to put a disclaimer there. We do have one of these planted up at the Northern Michigan Garden, and ours was very, very young, so this might be part of it, but I did notice that the deer were eating the buds of the flowers. But again, like I said, it was a very tender young plant, so that might have something to do with why the deer were nibbling. Also, this is a native variety. The next plant we'll be looking at is the Delphinium red lark. So this is a plant that I saw all over the trade show floor this summer when we were at Cultivate, which is the industry trade show for greenhouse growers. And this was an amazing delphinium. So a lot of times, most of the time, delphiniums are shades of blue, purple, sometimes you'll get some whites in there, some light pinks on occasion, but Delphinium is primarily known for its like blue and purple blooms. Well, red lark has really kind of changed the color pattern or color scheme of Delphinium by bringing in more of a, it's kind of a corally red, pink, kind of all mixed together kind of feel. And we'll pop pictures up of this as well. But truly a unique colored Delphinium to add to the garden. When I saw it out in the trial garden and at the trade shows, what things I noticed is it had a really nice full bushy habit to it. Fairly tall flower spikes, like the flowers on the plant were anywhere from 12 to 18 or so inches tall. So really nice, beautiful flower spikes with double flowers. So this is definitely one I will be adding to my home garden, and I'm certain out here at the trial garden at the greenhouse as well, because it is just such a lovely Delphinium. One thing with Delphinium, I will say, depending on where you're at and your location, this might be a plant that you do need to either plant by something that can hold it up, plant along like a fence line or something, just to give it a little something for it to lean on. Because if you have these tall spikes out in the middle of a windy garden, sometimes they are tall and can take a beating. So in my own garden, I have other Delphinium. I just put a tomato cage in the ground and let them grow up and through that tomato cage. That way it gives them support, so I don't have to worry about them toppling over in a strong wind. So let's take a look at some details of Delphinium red lark. So red lark has beautiful double blooms, that nice upright habit, gets about 36 inches tall and 24 inches wide, hardy in zones 5 to 8, and it is a very long blooming perennial. When it's done flowering, you can trim those old stalks off, and usually it'll regenerate and bloom again. It likes to be planted in a full sun to part shade location and attracts butterflies and hummingbirds in the garden. It's another great deer and rabbit resistant perennial, and it's great and just an excellent plant for a cut flower, for like if you're creating a flower arrangement and need something tall, this is a great thriller for your cut flower arrangements. And it also makes a nice dried flower if you're into doing dried flowers. Next on the list is Phlox. This is the Luminary Coral Sunset Phlox, part of the Proven Winners Phlox collection. And this plant is gorgeous. So a lot of the phlox right now that are in the Proven Winner collection are shades of whites, kind of pinks, purples, but by having this coral sunset, it really expands the color spectrum of phlox. So this is kind of a coral color, a corally pink color, really bright, like the name sunset in the name, I think is perfect because it does. It looks like the evening sunset. The thing I like about the luminary phlox is they're fairly disease resistant. So if you've grown tall phlox in your garden before and they will get powdery mildew or whatever on them, this one here has been bred and is very clean. Not to say you won't see it at all, because if you've got the perfect storm going on, it can show up. But in most situations, this should stay very clean for you and not have any issues with the powdery mildew. Nice upright habit, nice bushy full habit, and a lot of flowers off of one plant. So this is a great one. You can plant just one, or if you want to plant a grouping, it's a beautiful, beautiful new phlox edition. So let's take a look at the details of Luminary Sunset Coral. It's a rebloomer, so when it is done flowering, if you want to give it a light trim, it will generate more flowers. Hardy in zones 3 to 9, so it's got excellent hardiness to it. It gets about 3 foot tall, just under 3 foot tall, 32 inches tall and 32 inches wide when it's mature. It likes to be grown in a full sun to part shade area. Here in Michigan, I prefer planting mine in the full sun, but for those of you maybe in the south, part shade might be a better option for you. Again, a great plant for the pollinators, attracts butterflies and hummingbirds, and a nice cut flower, fragrant flowers, and a native plant variety. The next plant we're going to look at is Spigelia Ragin Cajun. So we have carried Spigelia probably for the last 5 years or so. Ragin Cajun is a new variety, and this plant is amazing in the trial gardens. So Little Redhead was the original, which is very red flowers with yellow centers. Raging Cajun has a little bit more orange to it, and it's just a little bit more compact than Little Redhead. But if you're looking for a plant that adds a unique color to the garden and just it's gorgeous, and it's not really that heard of, like I had never heard of it before, Raging Cajun is a great addition. So it's a native plant, so that's really nice. Blooms midsummer, and usually it's, trying to remember from last summer, but I think it was blooming upwards of at least 4 weeks, so really a long blooming perennial. So let's take a look at some of the pictures and some of the details of Raging Cajun so you can see for yourself just how beautiful it is. So Raging Cajun is a prolific long blooming perennial. It's native. It attracts the hummingbirds with its long tubular flowers. It's hardy in zones 5 through 9 and gets about 24 inches tall and 24 inches wide. It likes to be grown in full sun to full shade locations, so it really has a big spectrum of where it can be grown, although from my experience I've noticed that it's done better in the full sun to part sun areas. Deer and rabbit resistant, so it checks another box there if deer and rabbit are an issue in your garden, and it makes a great cut flower as well. So Spigelia Raging Cajun, really something to check out for 2023. Next and last on the list is a new coneflower, part of the double coated series, double coated meaning a double flower, and this is Raspberry Beret. So Proven Winners has had coneflowers in their collection for probably 3 or so years now. This is the first year that they've added some of these beautiful doubles in. So Raspberry Beret, what I've really enjoyed about that is just the deep, intense color of the flower, a large cone on it, and the habit out in the trial gardens has been really nice. So a nice big plant, nice bushy habit, fairly compact, so you don't have to worry about it tipping over in the wind, but just really great habit, great flower coverage, and beautiful flower form. So let's take a little bit more look into the details of Raspberry Beret. Raspberry Beret is a prolific bloomer with a fully double flower. The thing too is once they're done flowering, leave the flower heads behind because the birds really enjoy the seeds. It's hardy in zones 4 to 8 and gets about 20 inches tall and about 24 inches wide. So like I was saying, compact, but yet tall enough to really have a presence in the garden. It likes to be planted in full sun to part shade locations. Butterflies really enjoy it, as well as those songbirds who are getting the seeds once the plant is past its prime. Again, this is another deer resistant option, so there's been a lot of deer resistant options in these new plants. They make a great cut flower, they're drought tolerant, fragrant, and coneflowers are a native variety. I hope you've enjoyed this little top 10 list of mine for the new perennials for 2023. If there's anything I've talked about today that you're like, I gotta have it, I gotta put that on my list, Garden Crossings is a mail order company. So we ship plants all over the United States. You can head to our website, gardencrossings.com, or if you're local here to Zeeland, Michigan, we have a retail outlet as well. So we look forward to talking more about some of the fun new plants for 2023 and beyond. Thanks for listening today. If you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video. This is Heidi from Garden Crossings.